Picture yourself waking up on Boxing Day morning 1963, your bedroom so cold you could see your breath indoors. The windows weren't just frosted over, they were thick with ice on the inside, like someone had painted them white during the night. You'd scrape away the crystals with your fingernail just to peek outside, and what you'd see would take your breath away. Snow piled higher than garden fences, cars buried completely, streets that looked like Arctic wastelands. This wasn't just winter, this was the Great Freeze of 1963, the coldest Christmas Britain had ever seen. For those who lived through it, Christmas that year wasn't about presents or turkey dinners. It was about survival, about staying warm when the pipes froze solid, about getting food when the shops couldn't get deliveries, about making it through the longest, harshest winter in living memory. If you remember that freeze, you'll never forget how Christmas changed forever when Britain turned into a frozen wasteland. The cold arrived like an enemy army, sudden and merciless. Christmas Eve. 1962 had been mild, almost pleasant. People were out shopping, children playing in the streets, families making last-minute preparations. Then overnight, everything changed. The temperature plummeted faster than anyone could remember. By Christmas morning, thermometers were reading -10, -15, numbers that seemed impossible for Britain. But this was just the beginning. The freeze would last for 3 solid months, turning the country into something unrecognisable. Your house became a battleground against the cold. Central heating was still a luxury most families didn't have. You relied on coal fires, gas heaters, and layers upon layers of clothing. But nothing worked against this freeze. The cold seeped through every crack, every gap, every window frame. You'd wake up and find ice crystals on the inside of your bedroom walls. The bathroom was like stepping into a freezer. Getting dressed meant racing to put on clothes that felt like they'd been stored in a refrigerator overnight. The pipes froze first, not just the outside ones, but the pipes inside your house, running through unheated areas. One morning you'd turn the tap and nothing would come out. Then you'd hear the telltale crack of a burst pipe somewhere in the walls. Water damage, flooding, and no way to fix it because the plumbers were overwhelmed. Every street had houses with frozen pipes. Every family was dealing with the same crisis. You'd carry buckets of water from neighbours who still had running taps, or melt snow in pots on the stove just to have something to wash with. Food became a daily worry. The freeze didn't just affect your house, it paralysed the entire country. Delivery trucks couldn't get through the snow. Trains were cancelled for days at a time. Roads were impassable, buried under drifts that reached the rooftops. The corner shops that managed to stay open were running out of everything. Bread disappeared first, then milk, then tinned goods. You'd queue for hours in the bitter cold just to buy a loaf of bread or a bottle of milk. People started hoarding whatever they could find. Families who normally had plenty suddenly found themselves rationing food like it was wartime again. The milkman, if he could get through at all, would find his bottles frozen solid on the doorstep. The milk had expanded and cracked the glass, leaving you with frozen chunks of cream and useless broken bottles. Coal deliveries stopped completely. The coalman's truck couldn't navigate the icy streets, couldn't make it up the hills, couldn't even start in the morning cold. Families who depended on coal for heating found themselves burning furniture, books, anything that would catch fire and give off heat. Christmas dinner that year was unlike any other. If you were lucky enough to have a turkey, you'd probably ordered it before the freeze hit, but cooking it became an adventure. Gas supplies were interrupted in some areas. Electric power failed when lines came down under the weight of ice. Some families cooked their Christmas dinner over open fires, like camping indoors. Others gave up on traditional meals entirely and ate whatever they could find, grateful just to have something warm. The snow didn't just fall, it attacked. Blizzards that lasted for days with winds that drove the snow horizontally, creating drifts 20 feet high. Cars were buried so completely that you couldn't even see where they were parked. Entire streets disappeared under white blankets. Children could climb onto the roofs of houses using the snow as ramps. But this wasn't fun snow for building snowmen and having snowball fights. This was dangerous, threatening snow that trapped families in their homes for weeks. Public transport ground to a complete halt. Buses couldn't run. Trains were stranded in stations or stuck between stops for hours. London Underground stations became shelters for people who couldn't get home. The few brave souls who ventured out walked through streets they barely recognised, using garden fences and lampposts as guides to navigate through the white wilderness that had swallowed their neighbourhoods. Workers couldn't get to their jobs. Schools closed and stayed closed for weeks. Hospitals struggled to get staff in and patients to emergency care. The country essentially shut down, paralysed by cold so severe it seemed to belong to another century. This wasn't just inconvenience. This was a national emergency that touched every single household in Britain. The elderly suffered most. In houses where one coal fire was the only source of heat, pensioners faced an impossible choice. Stay in the one warm room and risk hypothermia if the fire went out, or try to heat the whole house and watch your coal supply disappear in days. Many moved their beds into the living room, sleeping beside the fireplace like medieval peasants. Others wrapped themselves in every blanket, coat, and piece of fabric they owned, looking like walking bundles as they shuffled from room to room. Children adapted faster than adults, but even they struggled. School playgrounds became skating rinks where nobody wanted to play. The walk to school, when schools were open at all, meant trudging through snow deeper than your Wellington boots, arriving with soaked feet and frozen fingers. Teachers kept lessons short because the classrooms were too cold for learning. Ink froze in the fountain pens. Breath fogged up so thick you could barely see the blackboard. Some schools gave up entirely and sent everyone home until spring. The countryside became completely cut off. Farmers found their livestock frozen in the fields, sheep buried under snowdrifts, cattle huddled together for warmth that never came. Milk couldn't be collected from farms. Eggs froze and cracked in the hen houses. Vegetables in the ground turned to ice blocks. The harvest that should have fed Britain through winter was destroyed, adding to the food shortages that plagued every household. Villages were marooned for months. No post, no deliveries, no contact with the outside world except for the occasional radio broadcast. Neighbours became lifelines. If someone's coal ran out, the whole street would share what little they had. If a family's pipes burst, they'd move in with relatives until the thaw. Communities pulled together because survival depended on it. The bitter cold stripped away social niceties and left only the basic human need to help each other through. The freeze created its own strange beauty that nobody could appreciate while living through it. Telephone wires hung heavy with ice, snapping under the weight and leaving entire areas without communication. Trees split down the middle with sounds like gunshots echoing through the silent streets. Rivers and canals froze solid enough to walk on, something that hadn't happened in decades. The Thames itself began to ice over, creating scenes that belonged in Victorian Christmas cards, not modern Britain. But inside your house, beauty was the last thing on your mind. You'd wake up to find the water in your bedside glass frozen solid. The condensation from your breathing during the night had turned to frost on your pillow. Getting out of bed required genuine courage, knowing that first step onto the frozen floor would be agony. You'd dress under the covers, pulling on every layer you owned before daring to face the day. Washing became a luxury. With frozen pipes and no hot water, most families gave up on daily baths. You'd heat water in kettles and saucepans just to wash your face and hands. Hair washing happened once a week if you were lucky, and only after melting enough snow to fill a basin. Personal hygiene standards dropped across the country, not from choice, but from necessity. The psychological toll was enormous. Day after day of grey skies, bitter cold, and isolation wore people down. Depression set in as families realised this wasn't going to end quickly. Children cried from the cold. Adults snapped at each other over tiny things because the stress was unbearable. The simple act of getting through each day became an achievement. Sleep was fitful because you'd wake up every few hours to check if the fire was still burning, terrified of what morning would bring if it went out. Shopping became an expedition requiring military planning. You'd bundle up in every warm thing you owned, venture out into the Arctic wasteland, queue for whatever scraps were available, then race home before frostbite set in. Shop windows frosted over so thick you couldn't see what was inside. Door handles were so cold they burned your bare skin bare. The few shopkeepers who managed to keep their stores open became local heroes, providing not just goods but human contact in an increasingly isolated world. World. The Great Freeze of 1963 finally broke in March, but Britain was forever changed. For 3 months, the country had been tested like never before. Families who survived that winter learned what truly mattered. Not the perfect Christmas dinner or the latest gadgets, but warmth, food, and the people around you. They discovered that neighbours could become family, that sharing a bucket of coal meant more than any expensive gift, and that getting through each frozen day was victory enough. If you lived through that Christmas, you carry those memories like scars. The sound of pipes bursting in the walls, the taste of tinned soup heated over a candle, the feeling of ice crystals on your bedroom windows. The Great Freeze taught an entire generation that comfort was fragile, that winter could be an enemy, and that survival sometimes meant burning your furniture just to stay alive. Those who remember that frozen Christmas understand something the rest of us have forgotten. That warmth is precious. That food is a blessing. That getting through winter is never guaranteed. The Great Freeze of 1963 was the coldest Christmas Britain ever faced, and for those who survived it, every Christmas since has felt like a gift.